Section 4 of the Arabian Nights Entertainment, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wejian. The Arabian Nights Entertainment, Volume 4. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 4. The Story of Prince Ahmad and the Fairy Pari Bano, Part 1. There was a sultan who had peaceably filled the throne of India many years, and had the satisfaction in his old age to have 3 sons, the worthy imitators of his virtues, who, with the princess his niece, were the ornaments of his court. The eldest of the princes was called Hussein, the second Ali, the youngest Ahmed, and the princess his niece Nouronier. The princess Nouronier was the daughter of the younger brother of the sultan, to whom in his lifetime he had allowed a considerable revenue, but that prince had not been married long before he had died, and left the princess very young. The sultan, in consideration of the brotherly love and friendship that had always subsisted between them, besides a great attachment to his person, took upon himself the care of his daughter's education, and brought her up in his palace with the 3 princes, where her singular beauty and personal accomplishments, joined to a lively wit and irreproachable virtue, distinguished her among all the princesses of her time. The sultan, her uncle, proposed to marry her when she arrived at a proper age, and by that means to contract an alliance with some neighboring prince, and was thinking seriously on the subject, when he perceived that the 3 princes, his sons, loved her passionately. This gave him much concern, though his grief did not proceed from a consideration that their passion prevented his forming the alliance he designed, but the difficulty he foresaw to make them agree, and that the 2 youngest should consent to yield her up to the eldest brother. He spoke to each of them apart, and remonstrated the impossibility of one princess being the wife of 3 persons, and the troubles they would create if they persisted in their attachment. He did all that he could to persuade them to abide by a declaration of the princess in favor of one of them, or to desist from their pretensions, to think of other matches which he left them free liberty to choose, and suffer her to be married to a foreign attachment. But as he found them obstinate, he sent for them all together and said, "My children, since I have not been able to dissuade you from aspiring to marry the princess your cousin, and as I have no inclination to use my authority, I give her to one in preference to his brothers. I trust I have thought of an expedient which will please you all, and preserve harmony among you, if you will but hear me, and follow my advice. I think it would not be amiss if you were to travel separately into different countries, so that you might not meet each other. And as you know, I am very curious, and delight in everything that is rare and singular. I promise my niece in marriage to him who shall bring me the most extraordinary rarity. Chance may lead you to form your own judgment of the singularity of the thing which you bring, by the comparison you make of them, so that you will have no difficulty to do yourself justice by yielding the preference to him who has deserved it. And for the expense of travelling, I will give each of you the sum suited to your rank. And for the purchase of the rarity you shall search after, which shall not be laid out in equipage and attendance, as much display by discovering who you are would not only deprive you of the liberty to acquaint yourself of your judge, but prevent your observing those things which may merit your attention, and may be most useful to you." As the 3 princes were always submissive and obedient to the sultan's will, and each flattered himself fortune might prove favorable to him and give him possession of the Princess Nouronier, they all consented to the proposal. The sultan gave them the money he promised, and that very day they issued orders for the preparations for their travels, and took leave of their father, that they might be ready to set out early next morning. They all went out at the same gate of the city, each dressed like a merchant, attended by a trusty officer, habited as a slave, and well mounted and equipped. They proceeded the first day's journey together, and slept at a caravansary where the road divided into 3 different tracks. At night, when they were at supper together, they all agreed to travel for a year, to make their present lodging their rendezvous, and that the first who came should wait for the rest, that as they had all 3 taken leave together of the Sultan, they might return in company. The next morning, by break of day, after they had embraced and wished each other reciprocally good success, they mounted their horses and took each a different road. Prince Hussein, the eldest brother, who had heard wonders of the extent, power, riches, and splendor of the kingdom of Bisnagar, bent his course towards the Indian coast, and after 3 months traveling, joining himself to different caravans, sometimes over deserts and barren mountains, and sometimes through populous and fertile countries, arrived at Bisnagar, the capital of the kingdom of that name, and the residence of its Maharaja. He lodged at a khan appointed for foreign merchants, and having learnt that there were 4 principal divisions where merchants of all sorts kept their shops, in the midst of which stood the castle, or rather the Maharaja's palace, on a large extent of ground, as the center of the city, surrounded by 3 courts, and each gate distant 2 leagues from the other, he went to one of these quarters the next day. Prince Hussein could not view this quarter without admiration. It was large, divided into several streets, all vaulted and shaded from the sun, but yet very light. The shops were of all the same size and proportion, and all who dealt with the same sort of goods, as well as all the artists of the same profession, lived in one street. The number of shops, stocked with all kinds of merchandises, such as the finest linens from several parts of India, some painted in the most lively colors and representing men, landscapes, trees, and flowers, silks and brocades from Persia, China, and other places, porcelain from Japan and China, foot carpets of all sizes, surprised him so much that he knew not how to believe his eyes. But when he came to the shops of the goldsmiths and jewelers, for those 2 trades were exercised by the same merchants, he was in a kind of ecstasy at beholding such prodigious quantities of wrought gold and silver, and was dazzled by the luster of the pearls, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and other precious stones exposed to sale. But if he was amazed at seeing so many treasures in one place, he was much more surprised when he came to judge the wealth of the whole kingdom, by considering that, except the Brahmins and the ministers of the idols, who profess a life retired from worldly vanity, there was not an Indian, man or woman, through the extent of the kingdom, but wore necklaces, bracelets, and ornaments about their legs and feet, made of pearls and precious stones, which appeared with a great luster, as they were blacks, which color admirably set off their brilliancy. Another object which Prince Hussein particularly admired was the great number of flower sellers who crowded the streets. For the Indians are such great lovers of flowers that not one will stir without a nosegay of them in his hand, or a garland of them on his head. And the merchants kept them in pots in their shops, so that the air of the whole quarter, however extensive, is perfectly perfumed. After Prince Hussein had passed through that quarter, street by street, his thoughts fully employed on the riches he had seen, he was much fatigued, which a merchant perceiving, civilly invited him to sit down in his shop. He accepted his offer, but had not been seated long before he saw a crier pass with a piece of carpeting on his arm, about 6 feet square, and crying it at 30 purses. The prince called to the crier and asked to see the carpeting, which seemed to him to be valued at an exorbitant price, not only for the size of it, but the meanness of the materials. When he had examined it well, he told the crier that he could not comprehend how so small a piece of carpeting, and of so indifferent an appearance, could be set at so high a price. The crier, who took him for a merchant, replied, "Sir, if the price seems too extravagant to you, your amazement will be greater when I tell you I have orders to raise it to 40 purses and not part with it under." "Certainly," answered Prince Hussein, "it must have something very extraordinary in it, which I know nothing of."
"You have guessed right, sir," replied the crier, "and will own it when you come to know that whoever sits on this piece of carpeting may be transported in an instant wherever he desires to be, without being stopped by an obstacle." At this account, the Prince of the Indies, considering that his principal motive for his tour was to carry the Sultan his father home some singular rarity, thought that he could not meet with any which would afford him more satisfaction. "If the carpeting," he said to the crier, "has the virtue you attribute to it, I shall not think 40 purses too much, but shall make you a present besides." "Sir," replied the crier, "I have told you the truth, and it will be an easy matter to convince you of it as soon as you have made the bargain of 40 purses, on condition I show you the experiment. But I suppose you have not so much with you, and to receive them I must go with you to the khan where you lodge. With the leave of the master of the shop, we will go to the back warehouse, where I will spread the carpeting, and when we have both sat down, and you have formed the wish to be transported into your apartment at the khan, if we are not conveyed thither, it shall be no bargain, and you shall be at your liberty. As for your present, as I am paid for my trouble by the seller, I shall receive it as a favor, and feel much obligated by your liberality." On this assurance of the crier, the prince accepted the conditions, and concluded the bargain. Then, having obtained the master's leave, he went into the back shop, where they both sat down on the carpeting, and as soon as the prince had formed his wish to be transported into his apartment at the khan, he in an instant found himself and the crier there. As he wanted not more convincing proof of the virtue of the carpeting, he counted to the crier 40 purses of gold, and gave him 20 pieces for himself. In this manner Prince Hussein became the possessor of the carpeting, and was overjoyed that at his arrival at Bisnagar he had found so rare a curiosity, which he never doubted must of course gain him the possession of Nouronnier. In short, he thought it impossible for the princes, his younger brothers, to meet with anything to be compared with it. It was in his power, by sitting on this carpeting, to be at the place of rendezvous that very day, but as he would be obligated to wait there for his brothers as they had agreed, and as he was desirous of seeing the Maharaja of Bisnagar and his court, and to inform himself of the strength, laws, custom, and religion of the kingdom, he chose to make a longer abode in the capital, and to spend some months in satisfying his curiosity. It was the custom of the Maharaja of Bisnagar to give all foreign merchants access to his person once a week, so that, in his assumed character, Prince Hussein saw him often. And as this prince was of an engaging presence, sensible and accomplished, he distinguished himself among the merchants, and was preferred before them all by the Maharaja, who addressed to himself to be informed of the person of the Sultan of the Indies, and of the government, strength, and riches of his dominions. The rest of his time the prince employed in viewing what was most remarkable in and about the city, and among the objects which were most worthy of admiration, he visited a temple remarkable for being built all of brass. It was 10 cubits square and 15 high, but its greatest ornament was an idol of the height of a man, of massive gold. Its eyes were 2 rubies, set so artificially that it seemed to look at those who viewed it, on which side soever they turned. Besides this, there was another not less curious in the environs of the city, in the midst of the lawn about 10 acres, which was like a delicious garden full of roses and the choicest flowers, surrounded by a low wall, breast high, to keep out the cattle. In the midst of this lawn was raised a terrace, a man's height, and covered with such beautiful cement that the whole pavement seemed to be but one single stone, most highly polished. A temple was erected in the middle of the terrace, having a spire raising about 50 cubits high from the building, which might be seen for several leagues round. The temple was 30 cubits long and 20 broad, built of red marble, highly polished. The inside of the spire was adorned with 3 compartments of fine paintings, and there was not a part in the whole edifice but what was embellished with paintings, relievos, and gaudy idols from top to bottom. Every night and morning
There were superstitious ceremonies performed in the temple, which were always succeeded by sports, concerts of music, dancing, singing, and feasts. The Brahmins of the temple and the inhabitants of the suburb had nothing to subsist on but the offerings of pilgrims, who came in crowds from the most distant parts of the kingdom to perform their vows. Prince Hussein was also spectator of a solemn festival, which was celebrated every year at the court of Bisnagar, at which all the governors of provinces, commanders of fortified places, all heads and magistrates of towns, and Brahmins most celebrated for their learning were usually present, and some lived so far off that they were 4 months in coming. This assembly, composed of such innumerable multitudes of Hindus encamped in variously colored tents, on a plain of vast extent, was a splendid sight as far as the eye could reach. In the center of this plain was a square of great length and breadth, closed on one side by a large scaffolding of 9 stories, supported by 40 pillars, raised for the Maharaja and his court, and those strangers who he admitted to audience once a week. Within, it was adorned and furnished magnificently with rich carpets and cushions, and on the outside were painted landscapes wherein all sorts of beasts, birds, insects, even flies and gnats were drawn very naturally. Other scaffolds of at least 4 or 5 stories, and painted almost all with the same fanciful brilliancy, formed the other 3 sides. But what was more particular in these scaffolds, they could turn and make them change their font so as to present different decorations to the eye every hour. On each side of the square, at some little distance from each other, were ranged 1,000 elephants, sumptuously caparisoned, each having upon its back a square wooden stage, finely gilt, upon which were musicians and buffoons. The trunks, ears, and bodies of these elephants were painted with cinnabar and other colors representing grotesque figures. But what Prince Hussein most of all admired, as a proof of the industry, address, and inventive genius of the Hindus, was to see the largest of these elephants stand with his 4 feet on a post fixed to the earth, and standing out of it above 2 feet, playing and beating time with its trunk to the music. Besides this, he admired another elephant as large as the former, placed upon a plank, laid across a strong beam about 10 feet high, with a significantly heavy weight at the other end, which balanced him, while he kept time by the motions of his body and trunk with the music, as well as the other elephant. The Hindus, after having fastened on the counterpose, had drawn the other end of the board down to the ground and made the elephant get upon it. Prince Hussein might have had a longer stay in the kingdom and court of Bisnagar, where he would have been agreeably diverted by a great variety of other wonders till the last day of the year, whereon he and his brothers had appointed to meet, but he was so well satisfied with what he had seen, and his thoughts ran so much upon the object of his love, that after such success in meeting with his carpet, reflecting on the beauty and charms of the Princess Nouronier, increased every day the violence of his passion, and he fancied he should be the more easy and happy the nearer he was to her. After he had satisfied the master of the khan for his apartment, he told him the hour when he might come for the key, without mentioning how he would travel. He shut the door, put the key on the outside, and spreading the carpet, he and the officer he had brought with him sat down upon it, and as soon as he had formed his wish, were transported to the caravanserai at which he and his brothers were to meet, and where he passed for a merchant till their arrival. Prince Ali, the second brother, who had designed to travel into Persia, in conformity with the intentions of the Sultan of the Indies, took that road, having 3 days after he parted with his brothers joined a caravan, and in 4 months arrived at Shiraz, which was then the capital of the Empire of Persia, and having in the way contracted a friendship with some merchants, passed for a jeweler, and lodged in the same khan as them. The next morning, while the merchants opened their bales and merchandises, Prince Ali, who travelled only for his pleasure, had brought nothing but necessaries with him, after he had dressed himself, took a walk into the quarter of the town where they sold precious stones, gold and silver works, brocades, silks, fine linens, and other choice and valuable articles, and which was at Shiraz called the Byzantine. It was a spacious and well-built street, arched over, within the arcades of which were shops. Prince Ali soon rambled through the Byzantine, and with admiration judged of the riches of the palace by the prodigious quantities of the most precious merchandises exposed to view. But among the criers who passed backwards and forwards with several sorts of goods, offering to sell them, he was not a little surprised to see one who held in his hand an ivory tube of about a foot in length and about an inch thick, which he cried at 40 purses. At first he thought the crier mad, and to inform himself went to the shop and said to the merchant who stood at the door, "Pray, sir, is not that man," pointing to the crier, who cried the ivory tube at 40 purses, "mad? If he is not, I am much deceived." "Indeed, sir," answered the merchant, "he was in his right senses yesterday, and I can assure you he is one of the ablest criers we have, and the most employed of any, as being to be confided in when anything valuable is to be sold. And if he cries the ivory tube at 40 purses, it must be worth as much or more, on some account or another which does not appear. He will come by presently when we call for him, and you shall satisfy yourself. In the meantime, sit down on my sofa and rest yourself." Prince Ali accepted the merchant's obliging offer, and presently afterwards the crier arrived. The merchant called him by his name and pointed to the prince and said to him, "Tell that gentleman who asked me if you were in your right senses what you mean by crying that ivory tube, which seems not to be worth much, at 40 purses. I should indeed be much amazed myself if I did not know you were a sensible man." The crier, addressing himself to Prince Ali, said, "Sir, you are not the only person that takes me for a madman on account of this tube. You shall judge yourself whether I am or no when I have told you its property, and I hope you will value it at as high a price as those I have showed it to already, and who had as bad an opinion of me as you have." "First, sir," pursued the crier, presenting the ivory tube to the prince, "observe that this tube is furnished with glass at both ends. By looking through one of them, you will see whatever object you wish to behold." "I am," said the prince, "ready to make you all proper reparation for the reflection I cast upon you, if you can make the truth of what you advance appear." And, as he had the ivory tube in his hand, after he had looked at the two glasses, he said, "Show me at which of these ends I must look, and I may be satisfied." The crier presently showed him, and he looked through, wishing at the same time to see the Sultan, his father, whom he immediately beheld in perfect health, sitting on his throne in the midst of his council. Next, as there was nothing in the world so dear to him after the Sultan as the Princess Neronier, he wished to see her, and instantly beheld her laughing and in a gay humor with her women about her. Prince Ali wanted no other proof to persuade him that the tube was the most valuable article not only in the city of Shiraz, but in all the world, and believed that if he should neglect to purchase it, he should never meet with an equally wonderful curiosity. He said to the crier, "I am very sorry that I have entertained so erroneous an opinion of you, but hope to make amends by buying this tube, for I should be sorry if anybody else had it. So tell me the lowest price the owner has fixed, and don't give yourself any further trouble to hawk about it, but go with me, and I will pay you the money." The crier assured him, with an oath, that his last orders were to take no less than 40 purses, and if he disputed the truth of what he said, he would carry him to his employer. The prince believed him, took him to the khan where he lodged, told him out the money, and received the tube. Prince Ali was overjoyed at the purchase, and persuaded himself that, as his brothers would not be able to meet with anything so rare and admirable, the Princess Neronier must be the recompense of his fatigue and travels. He thought now of only visiting the court of Persia incognito, and seeing whatever was curious in and about Shiraz. till the caravan with which he came might be ready to return to the Indies. He satisfied his curiosity, and when the caravan took its departure, the prince joined the former party of merchants, his friends, and arrived happily without any accident or trouble, further than the length of the journey and fatigued of travel, at the place of rendezvous, where he found Prince Hussein, and both waited for Prince Ahmed.